Welcome back, my beautiful money moguls and financiers in training. Welcome back to another episode of the Do.Different.Better Show, where we talk wealth wisdom and money moves, making finance simple for everyday people. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, founder and CEO of Social Impact Now and Connect Up Institute, as well as managing partner of the Integrated Capital Fund. I am so excited because what I have for you today is another amazing guest that I know that you're going to love and you're going to learn a lot from. And what is today's episode? We are actually going to talk about inheriting wealth. What does that mean? What does that look like? What are some things that if you are deciding to provide an inheritance, what are some things you need to think about? But also thinking about as the inheritor, what might be some of the things that you've gone through, that you're going through, and how can you navigate that process as well as that emotional journey just a little bit better with a little bit more confidence and leveraging that to find your purpose and impact. And on today's show, I have an amazing guest, Chase Collins. Chase, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Great. So before we get into it, let me give you a little bit of background on Chase. Chase Collins is a certified master life coach and founder of the Trust Fund Coach, where he helps inheritors navigate the often overlooked challenges of wealth. With firsthand experience growing up around generational wealth, his work is dedicated to helping trust fund recipients move beyond guilt, confusion, and societal expectations to build lives they truly love. Through coaching, speaking, and content creation, Colin provides clients with the emotional and financial complexities of inherited wealth. His approach blends personal development, financial literacy, and identity work, giving inheritors the tools they need to make confident, values-driven decisions. He challenges outdated narratives about privilege and wealth, helping his clients shift their mindset and take ownership of their future. And don't forget, he is also the author of Trust Your Trust Fund, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the show. But first up, Chase, what's your earliest memory of money?
Yeah, good question. I would say it was more of kind of the big tragic event in my childhood, which was my father passing away. And I was 11 years old. I really had no concept of money before then. And then there was this weird shift of money stress and consciousness just because our family was, up to that point relying on his inherited wealth, his family money. So once my mom was a single mom, it kind of shifted us into a whole new consciousness and situation.
And so you say that you grew up around generational wealth, but what were some of the seen or unseen or unspoken messages that you started to see? Particularly, you went from a nuclear family to having a single mom. What might be some of the messages you got about money and identity as a result of that life-changing moment?
Yeah, I would say silence around money and the we don't talk about it is something I definitely saw and felt a lot and experienced. And then identity tied to what you have instead of who you are. So that's really kind of what I noticed, especially going from, my mom and my dad living off of the family wealth, and then he dies. So there's a whole new dynamic. And so it was both sides of the coin.
What were some of the shifts in the dynamic? Like, what was it before? And then how did it shift and change afterwards?
Well, she was primarily a stay-at-home mom. And then they were going through a separation. So once he had passed away, she had to work and pay the bills, paycheck to paycheck. So, but yet I also had this brief understanding that I had a trust fund and my siblings had a trust fund, but we didn't really know what that meant, right? And, so then all of a sudden at 12 or 13 years old, I'm emailing a trustee and, it was a weird experience.
And did you know the trustee? Was this somebody who had been in your life, or is this like a brand new person? You're like, I don't know who this person is. I don't have a relationship with this person. What was that like? And did your siblings have the same trustee?
Yes. So it was one of our uncles, and so it was someone we knew, and then also additionally, like the financial advisor that had been, set to us. And so yeah, there was one aspect of someone we didn't know at all, and then our uncle who, um, you know, it that kind of introduced and made me aware to a whole layer of this onion, which is family dynamics and how inherited wealth and money and family business impacts family dynamics and relationships.
And what were some of the family dynamics that you saw shifted as a result of your dad's passing and now your mom stepping into not only this decision making role, but also caretaker role and having to navigate, I don't know if it was for the first time, but maybe first time in a long time of employment and just all of that comes with that. And, as a previously stay at home mom.
Yeah. Um, what was the first part of that question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. So like what were like some of the dynamics that you saw that like
Oh,
the before and after? Like how did things shift?
yeah. I mean, I think there was like a mindset and like abundant kind of an abundance mindset shift that happened there because we were kind of living in full abundance, and then I think being the oldest boy son, a lot of her money stresses and overall stresses with taking care of the kids kind of fell onto me. Um, so that for sure. And then yeah, I think that, it was an interesting experience for her to be living paycheck to paycheck and working and grinding hard. And then us kids kind of knowing we had money waiting for us, the second we turn 18.
So I think this is really great to understand because so many people assume that inheritance money means instant freedom. You're like, yay, woohoo, right? But you were, like as you were saying, 12, 13. But
Hmm.
you've said it can bring guilt and pressure and even shame. Like, where do those feelings come from? And what did they look like in your life? And, yeah, what did it look like in your life?
Yeah. Guilt and shame is something that I really saw my dad struggle with. He was, if you knew my dad, you loved him. He was the coolest, funniest, most humble guy. And he felt a lot of guilt and shame for his wealth. And I think that's what led him to kind of the path that he was on, and addiction and alcohol and overconsumption. Um, but he really did not understand why he was given everything, told he would never have to work when someone right there, couldn't afford their next meal. So, so that was my first really experience with it. And then as I, grew up and started to come into my experience, my inheritance, I started to experience, similar themes and cycles, and, realize that we're not alone. I'm not alone. And it's, a whole thing.
Do you remember sort of that moment when you sort of snapped out of it where you're feeling all this guilt and shame and maybe there was a moment of I got to do something different. I can't stay in this
Hmm.
place. Can you remember like what happened to make that shift for you?
Yeah, I was living in New York City and just in my early 20s trying to figure out what it is I want to do and my purpose and what makes me feel good and fulfillment. And it was just this low point of spending way too much money on things that did not matter. New York City is an expensive place to live.
It's very expensive.
Um, yeah, and then just kind of starting to have to face reality. And I always say the biggest blessing with me and my siblings and our generation is we have to work, we have to figure out something to live for the rest of our lives, where my dad was told he would never have to work. We're fifth generation. So
Mm.
um but yeah, that turning point really was just like huge credit card bills and like not making money, not feeling fulfillment, not on a purposeful path. And yeah.
And so when you think about it, it was very clear that you had to work. was your dad necessarily told not to work, or like, with some, especially if you get to a certain socialite level, even if you want to work, you're not allowed to work. Is that
Right.
something that you feel like your dad experienced?
He would dabble his feet in a few things here and there, and a business here and a business there, but it was never something super consistent. My family and I always talk about how the best thing he could have done as far as work would be like a PE teacher, because that was my dad. Like,
Mm.
he would have touched so many lives. He loved kids loved him. The impact he would have had, like, with that meaningful job. And a part of me wonders if there was some sort of family, I, uh, this unspoken family expectation, which is something you do often see. Um, and because you know when you come from a wealthy family, they might have these crazy expectations, or standards, I should say.
Yeah, one of my favorite movies, I think it's the Philadelphians. It's way before your time, before my time, but it's a great
Hmm.
movie with Paul Newman, and the mom gets pregnant. Like the dad, the day after they get married, the husband dies, and she ends up spending the night with a longtime friend, gets pregnant, but she, as the kid is growing up, she is able to keep the name of the family, but the family's like,
Hmm.
you will not have any of the family money. And so part of
Hmm.
her psyche is, I can't work, like I can't have this name and work. So
Interesting.
she's also like, so she's doing all this volunteering and she's not working, but she's struggling because she's trying to maintain this image that goes along with this name that she's
Right.
inherited, knowing that she's not getting any of the money, but that her son's going to have this money from his trust fund to be able to go to college and things like
Yeah.
that. So I definitely see some of those I hear some of those themes in your story.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a big, a part in my book is called Both Sides of the Coin. And that's really why I approached what I do now with helping inheritors and coaching inheritors and writing the book, is because I saw both sides of the coin so clearly. And, also, I grew up in a small town where people somehow knew that I had a trust fund, and my siblings and I had a trust fund. So then there's this stigma and assumption around what that is. And like, the average trust fund in America has about $280,000 in it. So there's all this stigma and assumption around it. And yeah, I was living this, like, both sides of the coin, and then on top of that, like, realizing the emotional and logistical struggles of inheriting, or you know the guilt, shame, isolation, or family dynamics and expectation.
Yeah, because I'm sure that people, especially when you're talking about 17, 18, 19, 20 year olds, especially you grew up in the social media generation, right? So I'm sure there
Hmm.
were this, oh, like, why aren't we flying and going off to like Paris like tomorrow for
Hmm.
lunch, right? You're like, this isn't how it works,
Yeah.
right? Because you have to, and tell me if this was your experience, like you have to go to the trustee, you have to ask for money, right? That's
Hmm.
like that's part of, I think, the logistical parts that you're talking
Hmm.
about. It's not like you have an open checkbook and you can just like make it rain,
Yeah,
right?
totally. It's tied up, and you have to make requests, and which is a whole experience in itself. It's like you're asking someone to borrow. It feels like you're asking someone to borrow money, and that's an experience that most inheritors have, is that it actually doesn't feel like theirs.
Right, because you don't, it's not like you can go to the bank and just ATM it. But
Yeah.
the perception is around you, particularly with young people. And I think particularly because of social media, you do see some uber wealthy children or young
Yep.
people who actually do have some of their own money, right? That,
Hmm.
maybe they were even though their parents are wealthy, they were child actors or they're content creators, and so they have some money, and you see them jet setting all over the world. So it
Hmm.
gives this, for I can imagine for you, you're like, okay, that's this image that's out there,
Yeah.
but that's not my life.
Totally. And just like having, like, the fact that my father passed away, I didn't it was all on me. So like my whole financial everything, like if I were to grow this trust fund into $1 billion, or if I were to lose all of it, that's on me. So,
Mm.
that was like a moment when I was in New York running around in this almost socialite, like rich kid, New York City, Manhattan, and just trying to keep up. And I was like, what is the difference here? And all these kids have their parents, their rich parents. And I'm like over here, funding it myself, literally getting the bill, getting the check, having to pay the credit card bill and deal with the logistical things and bills. And so, so many blessings, in it. And, yeah,
But also
it's
no one talking you through, okay, here's a checkbook. This is how
yeah,
much you have. Like, let's think about what your expenses
exactly.
are. Let's think about what's the cadence and the scope and the scale of your requests that you need to make. Like
Hmm.
when should you make them? How should you make them? Like you said, you were like basically emailing a stranger that you didn't know, as far as the money manager, and thinking about that's a whole nother language of like you've got this portfolio, right, of like
Yeah,
assets. Maybe there's stocks and you're like, I'm 17, 18 years old. I don't know what a stock, I don't know what a
totally.
stock is, right?
Yeah.
Did you experience some of that?
Oh, absolutely. All these terms and, official ways of business, really, that you are learning on the go. And taxes, too. Taxes were a big one that, like, because my dad had passed away, it's like I'm dealing with taxes and stuff from his, when you're working within an estate, too, or in an estate, it's, there's so many dynamics and layers. And yeah,
All right, and trying to just navigate that and understand that. So, just to give the audience some frame of reference,
yeah.
when you talk about your inheritance, are we talking six figures, seven figures, eight figures, just so folks can understand the scope and scale of what we're talking about?
Yeah. It's like couple seven figures, like low seven figures.
Okay.
Um, and and the biggest blessing that my grandmother did as well was we're the youngest of many, it's a big family of many cousins, and she kind of saw how my dad's generation and my cousins um, went and what they did with their money and when they got it kind of in big chunks. And so what she did for me and my siblings was structure it in a completely different way to where my first distribution was at 21 and then they will go until I'm 40. So it's very, very spread out. It's all in the market. And, when I turned 21, that was a big kind of epiphany moment because I was working full time, making great money for myself at an art gallery.
Yeah.
And I was about to get, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I would have went and bought designer and a Range Rover or a G-Wagon. Like literally, that's what I was like. And lucky enough, I decided to put it all down on the house, on a down payment. Bought a house and just put it away, and it was the best thing I could do for myself because, luckily it was the right place and the right time. And it's, 2 times when I purchased it. So, yeah, that was a big moment in kind of realizing, making big decisions when it came to, the distributions.
And setting yourself up for longer term success, right?
Yeah.
Especially having had that story. So, well, we're
Yeah.
going to wrap up this segment. We've been talking to Chase Collins on the Do Different Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, and we've really gotten into Chase's story of how his inheriting journey went and how that actually framed what we're going to be talking about in segment 2, which is his work as a trust fund coach. So now that we know the why, let's get into the how. See me after the break. And don't forget to follow us at Do.Different.Better.com. You can catch us on YouTube, and you can also follow us on AM 950 at AM 950 Radio. I will see you after the break. Hello, my money lovelies. It's so great to have you back on the Do Different Better Show. I am your host, Elaine Rasmussen, and we have an amazing guest. It is Chase Collins, who is the author of the Trust Your Trust Fund, and he is a trust fund coach. So we've spent the first segment talking about sort of his journey, his money story, and how suddenly inheriting his wealth, what did that do psychologically? What did that do? What were some of the logistical processes of managing all of that? And now we're actually going to get into like actually how he works with clients who are inheritors. So first, Chase, tell me about your clients. What are some of the things you hear when people actually come to you? What are some of the ways where you feel that they are stuck?
Yeah, I think the main thing is they come to me saying, I don't know what I want. It's a lack of clarity, yet they have the resources to kind of do what they want and have too many options. I would say the other thing is kind of a guilt for having more than others. That kind of guilt and shame come in. And then just fear of judgment and rejection or failure with the money, losing it all. Loss aversion, which is like the fear of having a greater fear of losing what you have than having the belief of making more or making it yourself.
Mm.
So those are the main things I see.
I think that is something we all have, right? And I think particularly in this moment in time where we are politically, there's a lot of loss aversion and people not being
Hmm.
able to think about, um, okay, I actually have something. And so how do I
Yeah.
multiply that? But I've also read, there's scientific research where if you want to motivate a human, tackle like frame something around loss because we're more apt to act
Yes.
around loss than we are apt to act around gain, which I find
Absolutely.
fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly the biggest motivator for myself, and then also many inheritors. It's having this. When you didn't earn the money or earn what you have. I think it's very natural to feel fear of losing it, or how can I keep it or maintain it or grow it.
So, what do you feel are some of the biggest myths? And we talked a little bit about in segment one, but what are some of the biggest myths around quote unquote rich kids that you wish people understood the more full context behind?
Yeah. Um, I think there's a few that come to mind. It's that they have it easy. Uh, I think the reality of it is it's, an emotional weight and not all ease and adds a lot of different dynamics. Um, the other one is they don't work hard because many actually are overcompensating and burning out. And if you're working in a family business, and it's your dad's or it's your grandparents or whatever it might be, you could be the hardest worker, but you will always be, the inheritor or the spoiled kid or silver spoon kid. So, um, yeah.
I know in my work, so my son works for me, and
Hmm.
we have this really interesting dynamic because one, we never like I never introduce him as my son and he never introduces
Hmm.
me as his mom. And people are always it takes them months, if not years to realize that we're related. He also just works for
Yeah.
me. He used to work for me full time. Now he's going to nursing school, so only works for me part time. But
Yeah.
it's so funny when people will come to me and be like, "Oh, I didn't know you guys were related," because it was I wanted him to have his own identity, but I also
Yeah.
wanted me to have my own identity, and he was going to succeed or fail on his own sort of merit. And he could
Totally.
also have the space to tell me that I don't want to do this anymore. This is not fulfilling. I don't like
Hmm.
this. And it's by making him feel as close to an employee as possible, because I
Hmm.
also do that with my own employees. I said, listen, this is not the place for everybody all the time. And so if
Yeah.
you're finding that this is an environment or your job is not a job that you feel that there's something you want to do, that you can do, that you should be doing, let's have that conversation. So I've always tried to like have him feel just like an employee where he can be like, you know what, like this isn't working for me anymore. Oh, great. And we actually had a similar conversation as he's going into nursing school. I really want him to be able to, I don't want, because he was saying, he's like, oh, like once I get past this part of my nursing program, I can start coming back to work for you. And I said, no, I want you to go and get a nursing job. I said, you're only doing this job because this is the job that you have right now. But the whole goal is not for you to, I don't want you to stay working for me when I know that you're trying to go and do this other thing that is also great and noble. And to
Yeah.
your point, I think is like finding your own self-worth. Right. I
Yep.
think that's where a lot of what I'm hearing from you, it's like you've got to find your voice. And
hmm
so how do you work with people to help them find that purpose? How, like, what are some of the things that you say to them of like, just what's that journey to figure that out?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think the first thing is like a values clarification. What do I really want? Um, and figuring out, your core values. And then I would say really, I mean, it depends on the situation. Because, I, if it's, it could be boundaries with defining where families, um, you know, defining family boundaries and yeah, and
What,
then I'm
what,
spacing, sorry.
yeah, that's okay. What are some unhealthy boundaries that you've seen that,
Yeah,
that you work with your clients to correct?
yeah, for sure. I would say over reliance on their family or their
Mm,
family wealth or their trust fund.
mm,
I think if you're relying too much on one thing, it can always be bad. And then see like a interesting power or control thing when it comes to the boundaries and family. So really, really, I actually just had a conversation yesterday with a client about how many times inheritance and family business has a personal tie and connection to you and an emotional one. Yet everyone you're dealing with, it's just a business. So kind of shifting it to that mindset
mm.
and taking less of the personal emotional side out of it.
I think that's really valuable because and it's probably not it's easier said than done, right?
hmm
Because particularly in your case, you talked about like it's not like you got the inheritance and your dad was still around, right?
Right.
You got the inheritance because he wasn't around, right? Well, like
Right.
not, but and so
Yeah.
having to figure out what does that mean and what does that look like. So, what have you seen, or maybe some of the unhealthy strings that you've seen from your clients that um, the bequeathers or the givers have attached to the trust fund that you think are not necessarily the best?
I would say um, overconsumption, right? And like moving from like consumption to contribution,
Mm,
and working with them on that. And then it could be like feeling this guilt and shame to always be paying, or an interesting one I recently worked with was this guilt to be um, giving, like to charities and stuff. And it wasn't anything out of like personal values or wants. Instead, it was more of like a vain, you know, um, societal expectation thing.
mm. So what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm hearing you right, of you're giving for the PR versus
Right,
giving because this is actually something that is important and valuable and meaningful to you.
right, right.
Gotcha, 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 gotcha. So it sounds like you really focus on working on their mindset, and their
hmm
financial literacy. What are some specific tools that you use or that you give your clients to reclaim that agency over their wealth story?
Yeah. I use kind of this self-coaching model that kind of really shows you your brain and how your thoughts affect your feelings and actions and results. So I, first teach them that and how to, break that down fully. And then, and then really dive into their values and their beliefs and what do they want and how do they get there. I think, a really common problem is with my client is having too many options, right? So
Mhm.
kind of narrowing those down. What do you like to do? What do you not like to do? And, um, start to build the life you love.
So I think this is a great segment to talk about having impact with your money. What does having impact with your money mean to you? And what do you think it can look like for for your clients?
Yeah, I would say, having impact with your money is something I just said a minute ago, moving from consumption to contribution, and really contributing with, where you want to contribute and where you want to change the world. Because that's kind of one of the things I kept asking myself when I was writing the book and going through this whole process was like, what if every inheritor could like use their money for good and change the world in the way they wanted, felt they could. And it would change the world, one, business or charity at a time. And so, yeah, examples could be, philanthropy or businesses or investing in causes that align with their values. Um, and then I have a couple different exercises, pretty profound exercises that I run my clients through. So it's kind of this whole legacy mapping and impact goals, and then redefining ROI as return on impact.
Mm.
And and yeah.
I love that. And we're going to dive a little bit more in that into segment three. We're going to wrap up this segment. We have just been talking with Chase Collins, who is the trust fund coach and is the author of Trust Your Trust Fund. We are going to be going into segment three, kind of really talking more about some of the practical and tactical things that whether you are looking to leave an inheritance for a family or non-family member, and what are some of the things you can start thinking about now if you know that you're expecting an inheritance or if you've just recently received an inheritance. So see us back after the break. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube and Instagram at AM 950 Radio or at Do Different Better. I'll see you after the break. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the last segment of this episode of the Do Different Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, and I have with me Chase Collins, founder, author of the Trust Your Trust Fund, and founder and CEO of, he is the Trust Fund Coach. So we have now talked about his money journey, his inheritance journey. We have talked about how he worked with his clients, and now you're going to get some tactical and practical ways that you can start thinking about it. Maybe you're not ready for a coach. Maybe you're trying to think about whether you should have a coach. We're going to give you some tools and tips of things that you can actually do today, whether you're expecting an inheritance, you've just received an inheritance, or you've been sitting with an inheritance for a while and you're just not sure what to do. And some of the things that we talked about, guilt and shame and not knowing how to activate yourself, we're going to get into some of those things. So, Chase, what does purpose look like when money is no longer the motivator, but pressure still exists to do something big?
Right. So purpose is alignment with values and not financial need. So it's focusing on fulfillment and growth and that contribution. And then really reframing this pressure to do something big to do something meaningful. And yeah.
And I think there's lots of places that that offer that. So obviously, people can hire you to work with you on an individual basis. But I know that there's some other groups. I am a Just Economy Institute fellow. I went through that program, and that is a cohort model that people can go through, whether they are soon to be wealth inheritors or will become wealth inheritors, or they're currently wealth inheritors or have built their own wealth. There's another one. I know Cordata Capital also has a cohort program. They work with, I believe it's the top 1%. But you can be in a cohort. For some people like to work one-on-one. Some people like to work in a group. Some people like to do both. So I think having somebody like you to kind of maybe go a little bit deeper and more on an individual level. But I think that whole thing of knowing thyself, which is what I'm hearing you say, of you really have to maybe swim through honey to really figure out, what do you stand for? What's the identity you want to create that may be different from your parents, grandparents, or wherever the wealth is coming from? And figuring out, what I talk to people about is, what are those identities that you want to keep? And what are the
Right.
identities that you want to shed? And I think of it as a wardrobe, like a closet, right?
Yes.
There are some clothes you want to wear. They're like, oh my
Yes.
God, I'm bold colors. I like checks. I like houndstooth. I love all the patterns. I love paisley. And
Hmm.
versus like, oh, I want no black in my wardrobe, right? So like, what are thinking about all these things as clothes on a hanger, and which ones
Yes.
do you want to take off, and which ones do you want to keep, and how to make your own way, and how can you reconcile the family expectations? And some people do better than that. They just reject the family expectations. But I think most of us as humans, we want to belong, right? And so
Yeah.
how do we sort of strike a balance between wanting to not be ostracized, but also being able to stand in our own voice?
Yeah, totally.
So how do you help someone define the life they love, not just a life that looks good on Instagram?
Yeah. Well, first thing, you need to separate external validation, so Instagram
Mhm.
or family, from your internal desires, right? And then I would say you really have to shift from like the life you live, and like living a life to live and not one to perform, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
live your life for you and don't perform. And there's a few exercises you can, I take my clients through to kind of do these shifts and separate that external validation. Different visioning exercises and purpose mapping, and yeah.
And so when we think about reimagining the next generation of wealth inheritors, what would you want them to do, or what would you want them to unlearn now?
Yeah. I would want them to know that wealth is a tool and it's not your identity. I would want them to use it to design their authentic lives and impact. And then I would want them to unlearn the shame, the secrecy, and the guilt, and the need to prove your worth through excess.
So now let's flip that. For
Hmm.
people who are wanting to provide an
Hmm.
inheritance, what should they be doing differently?
The biggest thing is communication, open communication, and talking about it, and not creating a weird stigma or shame or guilt or energy around it. And then teach financial literacy, the basics at least, and emotional literacy. I think that's where a lot of inheritors are lacking, is that emotional literacy. And then to anyone who wants to give, I would just say give with trust and not control. You know,
Talk more about that.
just I think we've talked about it a bit already, but just how this automatically money puts weird power dynamics in place. So if one person's giving you something, and soon they could be holding things over your head or whatever it might be, and that also goes back to boundaries. But um, I just, for myself, I know that, once I have kids and building something for them to give, I would just want to give with knowing that, I raised them right and I trust them, and they're going to do what they're going to do with it, or, trust that, and not use it as a way to control anyone or get your way.
What age do you, and you may not have an answer for this, but what age do you think, let me ask it this way. What age do you wish your family had told you and maybe done some of that education for you, knowing now that you were going to lose your dad at like 12 or 13?
Hmm. Well, I have such a unique situation because I was very young for the conversation to be happening, especially in the way it was happening. Like I said, emailing trustees at 12, 13, like it was just a bizarre thing, right? And
It is.
living with my mom who is struggling to pay the rent. And so, but then like with my sisters and most of my clients actually, most of the times people are hiding that they have like that they're giving an inheritance.
Mm,
So what I see more common is people wishing it was talked about sooner and wishing it wasn't such a, there, it's called sudden wealth syndrome, which is literally when you get a sudden amount of wealth. And you see this happen with athletes and actors and
mhm.
people who get the sudden wealth after they haven't had it. It creates all the issues that we've talked about today. And um, so yeah, so again, for me, my situation, I don't really wish they talked about it in any different way, or I don't think it could have been talked about in any different way for me, just because
Right.
of my situation. But like I said, for the most part, I think people wish it was talked about sooner and more openly. And yeah.
So I want to just my own natural curiosity. So you're 12 years old, you're told
Hmm.
about this inheritance. It sounded like you didn't get that first infusion of money until 18. Were there stipulations of like, hey, this money cannot be used for X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, so I actually didn't get my first big distribution until I was 21.
Okay.
But at 18 years old, I was technically, and as I was before I was 18, but yeah, it would provide for my cost of living and school. It really encouraged college, and it was written up to where it covers this, 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 and this, which pretty much is everything.
Okay.
And yeah, it was just under someone else's control. And then at 21, 20, it starts to roll out and bigger.
So were you helping your mom pay bills with this trust fund?
Towards the end, in high school, my
Mm,
brother and I were helping with the rent. And then, yeah, so that, and then also like whatever we needed, I grew up rodeoing and riding horses. So all of that was paid for, and, um, if I needed a new MacBook, like that was paid for. It's like that kind of stuff. But yeah, towards the end, we were able to, help my mom with the rent. And
but going back to the family dynamics, right? Because that's what I wanted to get into of like you're a kid helping your mom pay and
yeah,
like what does that do for a mom who
yeah,
feels like, her kids are taking care of her and feeling like that's her job just to take care of them, but it's because of a set of circumstances that, right? So like
yeah,
those are some of the that I can understand because I know that this happens in poor families, right? The same
yeah,
dynamic happens with poor families of like, hey, I've got to put this bill in my kid's name because, of just different circumstances. I don't
yeah.
have good enough credit to put a bill in my name. And so that sometimes can build a friction, even
Hmm.
amongst the most loving family can build some friction of like resentments, right? I mean,
Yeah.
did resentment ever come up in your family?
Yeah, for sure. I think, my mom grew up with money and she pretty much had her dad taking care of her. And then she met my dad and then they ran off, so she never had to worry about money, my mom. And she's an abundant person to this day. She is the most abundant giving person, right? So that kind of was her in the first place. But once, yeah, I think there was some resentment, and her mom has a lot of money, um, different money story than it's kind of the total opposite
Mm.
money stories. My dad's mom grew up in the most amount of wealth, and she grew up in the least, and so I felt some friction and, tension or weird dynamics maybe creep in on that side of the family. Um, and yeah.
Well, I love that. And so here's my final question. What is one tip from the book that's going to help inheritors or bequeathers do different better?
I would say doing different is not repeating the cycles of, your family cycles, whether it's guilt, the secrecy, or overconsumption. And then to be better, it's really aligning with your values and impact, and um, as an inheritor, aligning your wealth with, your values and impact. And then the one mindset shift I would say is wealth isn't the problem, it's how you choose to use it and be with it.
I love that. That is a great note to end the show on. I want to thank you, Chase, for being my guest on the show today. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. So, just to remind everybody, you have been listening to Chase Collin, who is the trust fund coach. He is also the author of Trust Your Trust Fund. You can check out his book. Let me give you that website. There's a crawler on the screen here, but you can go to thetrustfundcoach.com to get a copy of this book. You can follow him on Instagram at Trust Fund Coach, and don't forget to like and subscribe both his channel and mine, Do Different Better. And I can't wait to see you next week. We've got Eric Boatman on the show. It's going to be another fabulous episode, getting into some great things, talking about family offices and investing and special equity opportunities. So I can't wait to have you back and talk more about this. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to share it with other folks that you are thinking about, or that you are that if you're providing an inheritance, or just other folks who who might be getting an inheritance and they're not sure exactly what to do. But be sure to share this episode. There's a lot of great stuff here, particularly around unpacking a lot of the guilt and feelings, whether you're an inheritor or not. But I can't wait to see you next week when I help you do different better. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.